The woman was found dead in her apartment at exactly 3:17 a.m., her body arranged to tell a lie so carefully constructed that the city accepted it without resistance. The police called it a robbery gone wrong. The media repeated the phrase until it lost meaning. And before the sun rose, the truth had already been packed away inside a sealed folder marked Siloseed. But murders don't move this fast unless someone powerful is clearing the path. And Mara had spent her entire career learning the difference between coincidence and control. If you're drawn to dark investigations, powerful enemies, and stories where uncovering the truth comes at a cost, subscribe now. Midnight Case Files explores the cases that were never meant to be solved, where silence is enforced, justice is delayed, and every answer creates a new danger. Mara was alone in the precinct when she opened the case file again. The building had settled into its late-night rhythm, a low mechanical hum broken only by the occasional distant siren outside. Most of the desks were empty now, abandoned coffee cups drying into rings on old paperwork. The walls carried the faint smell of disinfectant and stale air, the scent of a place that never truly slept but rarely rested either. She preferred these hours. Fewer voices, fewer distractions, and fewer people asking why she was still staring at a case everyone else had already forgotten. The tablet in front of her glowed softly. Elena Crowley, 32 years old, senior financial analyst, employed by a private investment firm known for discretion rather than publicity. No criminal record, no restraining orders, no documented conflicts. Official cause of death, blunt force trauma sustained during a home invasion. Mara read the line twice, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to hear how wrong it sounded the second time. Home invasions were chaotic by nature. They left behind panic, noise, and mistakes. This scene had been quiet, almost respectful, as if whoever killed Elena had taken care not to disturb more than necessary. She swiped through the crime scene photos slowly, allowing herself to absorb the details rather than skim past them. The living room bore the full performance. A glass coffee table shattered outward, fragments distributed with suspicious uniformity. A drawer pulled halfway open, just enough to imply searching. A purse overturned on the floor. Cash still inside. Her gaze lingered there. Criminals didn't leave money behind unless money wasn't the objective. She zoomed in on the door lock. No signs of forced entry. No tool marks. No scratches. Either Elena had known her killer, or the killer had access most people didn't. Mara felt a familiar pressure settle behind her eyes. She moved on to the body. Mara stared at the words until the screen dimmed. She took one last look at Elena Crowley's name before powering down the screen. They wanted this case forgotten. Instead, it was going to follow them. Because murders like this didn't end with silence. They ended with exposure. And this was only the beginning. Mara didn't log the case reopen request. She didn't submit a motion. Test. She didn't notify her captain or update the system. If this investigation was going to continue, it would exist in the spaces between protocol, in the hours no one monitored closely, and in the conversations people pretended never happened. She left the precinct just after midnight. The city felt different at that hour, stripped of its daytime confidence. Streetlights cast long, uneven shadows across empty sidewalks. Storefronts reflected her silhouette back at her, fractured and distorted. Test. As if even her reflection wasn't sure it wanted to be seen. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of rain and exhaust. The kind of night where everything felt paused but not at rest. Mara drove without turning on the radio. She replayed the crime scene in her mind, frame by frame, letting the silence sharpen her focus. The lock. The staged mess. The pressure marks. And most of all, the audit request that had vanished like it had never existed. People didn't disappear audits by accident. Her destination was a low-rise apartment complex on the south side of the city, far from the polished towers Elena Crowley had worked beneath. One of Elena's neighbors had filed a noise complaint weeks before the murder. Nothing dramatic. Just a report of raised voices late at night. The complaint had been quietly withdrawn the next day. Mara parked a block away and walked the rest of the distance. The building looked tired. Peeling paint. Flickering hallway lights. The kind of place where people learned to mind their own business because curiosity invited trouble. She took the stairs instead of the elevator, listening to the echo of her footsteps, counting the floors. Third floor, apartment 3B. She knocked once, no answer. She waited, listening. A television murmured inside. She knocked again, softer this time. A chain rattled, the door opened only a few inches. A woman's eye appeared in the gap. Wide, alert, afraid. Yes? The woman asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mara held up her badge, keeping her tone calm. My name is Mara. I just need to ask you a few questions about Elena Crowley. The chain stayed in place. I already talked to the police, the woman said. They said it was over. I know, Mara replied. That's why I'm here. There was a long pause. The television volume dropped. Finally, the chain slid free. The woman opened the door and stepped back quickly, as if worried someone might see. She locked it again behind Mara. Her name was Claire Watkins. Early 40s. Divorced. Worked nights at a distribution warehouse. She looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. Dark circles under her eyes. Fingers twitching as she gestured toward the couch. I didn't want to get involved, Claire said. I really didn't. Mara didn't sit. She stayed standing, keeping her posture non-threatening. Tell me what you heard, she said. Claire swallowed. It was late. After 3. I was awake because my shift schedule's messed up. I heard voices through the wall, not shouting. That's what scared me. Mara nodded. What kind of voices? Controlled? Claire said. Like someone giving instructions. And Elena sounded confused, not panicked. Just trying to understand. Mara felt a chill move through her. Did you hear a struggle? She asked. Claire shook her head. No. That's the thing. There was a pause. Then a sound. Not loud. More like something heavy hitting something solid. She wrapped her arms around herself. And then nothing. Why did you withdraw the complaint? Mara asked gently. Claire laughed short and bitter. Because someone came to see me the next morning. Mara's eyes sharpened. Oh, I don't know. He didn't give a name. He wasn't police, but he knew things. Where I worked. My schedule. My daughter's school. Her voice cracked slightly. He said, I must have been mistaken. That stress can make people imagine things. And that if I valued my peace, I'd let it go. Mara felt the familiar anger rise, slow and controlled. Did he threaten you? She asked. Claire hesitated. Not directly. That's the worst part. He was calm. Polite. He kept smiling like he was doing me a favor. Mara took out her notebook but didn't write yet. She wanted Claire to feel heard, not processed. Did he mention Elena? She asked. Claire nodded. He said she'd gotten involved in things she didn't fully understand. That some mistakes couldn't be undone. Mara's jaw tightened. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Claire looked at her, eyes glossy. Because I don't sleep anymore. And because whoever did this is going to do it again. Mara finally sat. They talked for another 20 minutes. About timelines. About sounds. About the way Elena's voice had changed just before it ended. Mara recorded everything in her mind, knowing she couldn't officially document any of it yet. When she stood to leave, Claire grabbed her arm. They know you're asking questions, she said quietly. Mara didn't deny it. Back in her car, Mara didn't start the engine right away. She felt it now. The shift. The sense of being observed without being watched. This wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. Someone had intervened fast, clean, and personally. That meant resources. That meant authority. That meant wealth. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered without speaking. A man's voice came through, smooth and measured. "Detective, you're chasing a closed case." Mara's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Who is this?" she asked. A pause. Then a soft chuckle. "Someone trying to help you avoid unnecessary complications." Mara stared out at the darkened street. "You're calling from a blocked number." "That's not help. You're very good at what you do." The voice continued. "That's why this conversation is happening now instead of later." "Is that a threat?" Mara asked. "No," he said calmly. "It's advice." The line went dead. Mara sat there, breathing steadily. They weren't hiding anymore, they were watching. And for the first time since opening the file, Mara understood exactly what kind of case this was becoming. Not a murder investigation. A confrontation. Mara didn't go home after the call. She drove until the streets grew unfamiliar, until the glow of downtown faded into industrial sprawl and half-lit service roads. Sleep would only dull the edge she needed now. The voice on the phone hadn't raised itself. It hadn't threatened her directly. That was what made it dangerous. Whoever had called her wasn't improvising. He was managing. She parked beneath an overpass and sat with the engine off, listening to the city breathe around her. This was the point in every buried case where investigators made a choice, even if they didn't admit it to themselves. Step back and survive, or step forward and accept that the ground beneath you would never feel stable again. Mara chose forward. She pulled out a burner phone she hadn't used in months. Test. It wasn't registered in the system, wasn't linked to her name, and hadn't made a call since the last time she'd crossed paths with someone powerful enough to bend procedure. She powered it on and waited as it searched for signal. There was one person she trusted to move quietly inside the department. Not a friend. Not exactly an ally. More like someone who understood that truth didn't always arrive through official channels. Avon Holt worked records and data integrity, which meant he saw what disappeared before anyone noticed it was gone. Mara memorized the number before dialing. He answered on the third ring. "You're calling from something I can't trace," he said calmly. "That's not usually good news." "I need to know what was removed from Elena Crawley's file," Mara replied. "Not what's missing now. What vanished first." There was a pause. Fingers tapping. A keyboard in the background. "You're not assigned to that case anymore," Even said. "I know." Another pause, longer this time. "Someone flagged it above captain level," he said quietly. "That doesn't happen often." "What did they pull?" Mara asked. Evan exhaled. "Financial correspondence. Audit trail metadata. Internal notes Elena saved locally but since to the firm's cloud. All scrubbed within 12 hours of her death." Mara closed her eyes briefly. "Can you recover any of it?" "I can see shadows," Even said. "File sizes. Access timestamps. Someone with executive clearance logged in remotely before homicide even went public." That detail landed hard. "So they knew she was dead before the report," Mara said. "Yes." Mara ended the call without another word. She drove next to Elena Crowley's office building, just as dawn began to bleed into the sky. The tower rose clean and reflective, a monument to money and discretion. Security guards stood at the entrance, alert but bored, scanning badges and faces without really seeing them. Mara didn't go inside. Instead, she sat across the street in a coffee shop that smelled like burnt beans and old furniture, watching employees filter in. Analysts. Assistants. Executives in tailored coats who moved like the world bent around their schedules. Elena had been one of them. Mara watched the doors for nearly an hour before she saw him. Thomas Keller. Senior Compliance Officer. Public-facing. Polished. The kind of man who smiled easily and never said anything that could be quoted against him. He'd been listed as Elena's direct supervisor for her last 2 projects. Mara studied the way he moved. Relaxed. Unhurried. Untouched by the death of someone who worked under him, she waited until he stepped away from the building to take a call. Mr. Keller, she said, approaching without hesitation. He turned, surprise flickering across his face before it smoothed into professional warmth. Can I help you? Detective Mara. She replied, showing her badge briefly. I'd like to ask you a few questions about Elena Crowley. The smile faltered, just slightly. I was told the investigation was concluded. It was. Mara said. Then new information surfaced. He glanced around, then nodded. Of course, but I have a meeting. This won't take long, Mara said. What was Elena auditing? Keller's eyes sharpened. That's confidential. So is murder, Mara replied. A beat passed. People walked by. Cars moved. Life continued. She was looking into irregularities in a client portfolio. Keller said finally. Nothing unusual for someone in her position. Which client? Mara pressed. Keller hesitated. Just long enough. I don't recall, he said. Mara leaned in slightly. Elena filed an urgent audit request 3 weeks before she died. That request vanished. So did the supporting documents. Someone logged into the system before the homicide went public. That suggests foreknowledge. Keller's jaw tightened. Detective, if you keep asking questions like this, you're going to create problems for yourself. Mara held his gaze. Problems don't scare me. Keller's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, then back at her. This conversation never happened, he said. He walked away without waiting for her response. Mara returned to her car, pulse steady but sharp. She had confirmation now. Not proof, but confirmation. Elena hadn't just found something wrong. She'd found someone dangerous. Mara drove off just as her phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't a call. It was a notification. An internal warning had been added to her personnel file. Not disciplinary. Not official. A note. Activity under review. Mara smiled faintly as she merged into traffic. They were escalating. Which meant she was close. The warning in Mara's personnel file stayed with her longer than she expected. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the emptiness around them. No supervisor name. No timestamp beyond the minute it appeared. No explanation of what activity was being reviewed or why. It was a signal, not a record. Someone reminding her that she was visible. That her movements were being tracked without the courtesy of accountability. Mara spent the rest of the morning doing exactly what the system expected of her. She attended a briefing on an unrelated assault case. She nodded at the right moments. She asked safe questions. She filed routine paperwork that would never be read twice. To anyone watching, she looked compliant. Busy. Distracted. Inside, she was building a parallel investigation. By noon, rain had begun to fall, thin at first, then steady enough to blur the city's sharp edges. Mara drove to the medical examiner's office, under the pretense of reviewing another case. The staff there knew her well enough not to ask questions, and not well enough to volunteer information. Elena Crowley's autopsy report was already finalized. Too finalized. Mara read through it slowly, letting the clinical language wash over her. Cause of death confirmed. Time of death estimated between 3:30 and 3:25 a.m. No defensive wounds. No signs of prolonged struggle. She paused there. No defensive wounds didn't mean no resistance. It meant no opportunity. She requested the full toxicology screen, not the summary. The technician hesitated, then complied. Mara scanned the list twice before she saw it. A trace sedative. Low dose. Fast acting. The kind that calmed without fully incapacitating. Not enough to be lethal. Just enough to slow reaction time, to dull panic, to make compliance easier. Mara closed the file. Someone hadn't just planned Alina's death. They'd optimized it. She left the building feeling the weight of the case press heavier against her ribs. This wasn't a crime of impulse or emotion. It was a procedure. Clean. Layered. Designed to withstand scrutiny. And it was being protected from above. That afternoon, Mara paid a visit to the financial firm's secondary offices. Not the glass tower downtown, but the quieter annex where compliance records and legacy accounts were archived. The place where information went to age out of relevance. She signed in under her real name. If they were watching, she wanted them to know she wasn't hiding. The archive floor was nearly empty, rows of shelving stretching beneath dim lighting. A single clerk sat at the desk, scrolling through her phone, barely glancing up as Mara approached. "I'm looking for records associated with Alina Crowley," Mara said. The clerk typed, frowned, and typed again. Her access was revoked posthumously, she said. Most of her work products were reassigned. To whom? Mara asked. The clerk shrugged. It doesn't say. Mara leaned slightly closer. Can you tell me who authorized the reassignment? The clerk hesitated, then pointed to the screen. This name comes up a lot. Executive consultant. External. Mara memorized it without reacting. She didn't need the name yet. She needed the pattern. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed. This time it was Evan. "They're accelerating," he said without preamble. "Someone just initiated a full audit of your digital activity. They're not calling it disciplinary, but that's semantics. Can you slow it down?" Mara asked. "For a few hours." Evan replied. "Maybe a day if I'm lucky." "That's enough," Mara said. She hung up and walked out into the rain. By evening, the city had settled into a restless rhythm. Traffic hissed along wet streets. Office lights blinked off floor by floor. Mara drove toward the docks, toward a part of the city where wealth rarely lingered and questions were answered for the right price. Alina Crowley had made a call from a burner phone 2 days before she died. That detail hadn't made it into the official report. The call lasted 43 seconds. It was routed through a prepaid relay service and terminated near the industrial port. Mara parked near a closed shipping office and stepped into the damp air. The docks smelled of salt, oil, and rust. A man waited beneath an awning, collar turned up, hands buried in his pockets. His name was Luis Calderon. Independent data broker. Occasionally helpful. Frequently cautious. "You shouldn't be here," he said as Mara approached. "People are nervous." "So am I," Mara replied. "Who did Alina call?" Louis glanced around before answering. She didn't know who she was calling. She used a number that routes to whoever's listening. Who was listening? Mara asked. Louis swallowed. Someone with money. Someone who doesn't speak directly unless they have to. Mara felt the pieces tighten. What did Alina want? She asked. She wanted protection, Louis said. She thought if she shared what she found, someone would step in. And did they? Mara asked. Louis met her eyes. They did. Mara drove away from the docks with the rain pounding harder now, streaking across her windshield like static. Alina hadn't been silenced because she was powerless. She'd been killed because she believed someone more powerful would save her. Back at her apartment, Mara found the door unlocked. She froze, hand hovering near her weapon, listening. Everything inside looked untouched. No forced entry, no mess. On her kitchen table sat a single envelope. No name, no return address. Inside was a photograph. Mara standing outside Alina Crowley's apartment. Taken from across the street. Time-stamped. On the back, a message written neatly in ink. Be careful who you trust. Amara sat down slowly, heart steady, mind racing. This wasn't a warning meant to stop her. It was an invitation. And whoever was behind it wanted her to know one thing very clearly. They were no longer hiding. Mara didn't touch the photograph for a long time. She sat at her kitchen table with the lights off. The city's glow filtering in through the window blinds in thin, uneven lines. The envelope lay open in front of her like evidence already contaminated by intent. Whoever had left it hadn't rushed. They'd entered her apartment cleanly, quietly, and without leaving a trace. That alone told her more than the message itself ever could. This wasn't intimidation from the shadows. This was confidence. She finally picked up the photograph, studying the angle. Across the street. Elevated. Possibly from a parked vehicle or a second-story window. The timestamp was precise down to the second. That meant access to surveillance, great equipment, or someone who knew how to fake it convincingly. Either way, it wasn't a bluff. Mara turned the photo over again, rereading the message. Be careful who you trust. It was vague on purpose. A seed planted to grow doubt. If she questioned everyone, she'd isolate herself. If she trusted no one, she'd make mistakes. This wasn't about stopping her outright. It was about destabilizing her. She slid the photo back into the envelope and locked it away in a drawer beneath old case files she hadn't opened in years. If this case was going to pull her apart, it wouldn't start with panic. She showered, changed clothes, and forced herself to eat something small. Routine mattered. Structure mattered. It reminded her she was still in control of her body, even if the situation was shifting beyond protocol. By the time she left her apartment again, the city had gone quiet in that uneasy way that settled just before midnight. She drove without destination for several minutes, letting her thoughts line up. Alina Crowley had trusted someone with power. That meant Alina believed there was a system above the system. A level where problems could be erased cleanly, where protection came with silence attached. People didn't stumble into that belief by accident. Someone had given her reason to think help would come. Mara needed to know who. She drove to the downtown courthouse annex, not to enter, but to sit across from it. The building was dark now, its windows reflecting the city like blind eyes. Nearby, a private law office still glowed on the upper floors. Late night billing hours. Discreet consultations. Quiet deals. Elena had retained legal counsel 2 weeks before her death. That information had been buried deep in financial disclosures, disguised as a consulting fee routed through a shell account. Mara hadn't noticed it at first. No one had wanted her to. The attorney's name was David Linwood. Mid-career. Specialized in regulatory compliance and asset shielding. Known for representing clients who didn't want publicity and weren't afraid to pay for discretion. Mara waited until just after 1 in the morning before she approached the building. Linwood's office was unlocked. That alone told her something was wrong. Inside, the space was immaculate. Too immaculate. Desks cleared. Files gone. The faint smell of cleaning solutions still hung in the air. Someone had been here recently, erasing a presence rather than abandoning it. Mara moved slowly, careful not to disturb anything. She wasn't here to steal. She was here to observe. On a side table sat a single coffee mug, still damp inside. Whoever had been there hadn't planned on leaving quickly. Something had changed. Her phone vibrated. Even again. They pulled your access to archived warrants, he said. Soft block. No alerts, but you'll feel it. Thank you for telling me. Mara replied. Be careful. Evan added. This isn't just internal anymore. I know, Mara said, and ended the call. As she turned to leave Linwood's office, She noticed something she'd missed before. A faint indentation on the carpet near the desk. Something heavy had sat there recently. A safe. Removed in a hurry. Linwood hadn't just represented Alina. He'd panicked after her death. Mara returned to her car just as a black sedan pulled up across the street. It didn't park. It slowed, idled, then moved on. No headlights. No license plate she could read. She drove away without reacting, taking a longer route home, changing lanes, making unnecessary turns. The sedan never followed, but that didn't comfort her. It meant she'd been acknowledged, not pursued. The next morning, Mara woke to an email sent from an anonymous address. No subject line. Just a single sentence in the body. You're looking in the wrong place. She stared at the screen until the words lost shape. Then she smiled faintly. That was the thing about pressure. It always revealed itself when applied to the right spot. Someone had felt the need to redirect her. Which meant she'd hit close enough to matter. Mara spent the rest of the day referencing Elena's financial access logs with known shell entities tied to regulatory loopholes. Patterns emerged slowly, reluctantly, like something resisting discovery. One name appeared again and again, always one layer removed. A private holding company. Old money, quiet influence. And always, just beyond reach. By nightfall, Mara had a partial map of how money flowed through Elena's work. It wasn't illegal on its surface. That was the brilliance of it. Everything was technically compliant. Ethically questionable. Morally rotten. Someone had built a system that couldn't be accused without context. Elena had tried to provide that context. She'd paid for it with her life. Mara closed her laptop and leaned back, exhaustion finally pressing in. This wasn't just a murder case anymore. It was a collision between truth and infrastructure. Between one investigator and an architecture of power designed to outlast scrutiny. Her phone buzzed one last time before she slept. Unknown number. A text message this time. You're persistent. That's admirable. Mara typed back without hesitation. So was Elena. There was no reply. But somewhere in the city, someone had just realized that quiet warnings were no longer enough. And the game, whether they liked it or not, was officially underway. Mara woke before dawn with the uneasy certainty that she had slept through something important. Not a sound. Not a message. Just a shift she could feel in her body. The kind that came when events moved without her consent. She lay still for a moment, listening to the city outside her apartment. Traffic had already started to build. Somewhere nearby, a delivery truck backfired. Life continued, indifferent. She reached for her phone, no new messages, no missed calls. That, more than anything, unsettled her. The people circling this case had been reacting to her moves almost immediately. Silence meant recalibration. It meant they were adjusting strategy, deciding whether pressure alone would work or whether escalation was required. Mara got up and began her morning routine with deliberate care: coffee, shower, clean clothes. She moved slowly, forcing herself not to rush. Panic led to mistakes, and mistakes were expensive in cases like this. By the time she stepped outside, the sky was a dull gray, heavy with the promise of rain. She drove toward the precinct, not to work the case, but to watch. There was a difference. She parked across the street and sat in her car, observing who came and went. Detectives she recognized. Supervisors who rarely arrived early. A pair of unmarked vehicles she didn't recognize at all. Federal plates, partially obscured. Mara's pulse quickened, but her face remained calm. This had gone beyond departmental interference. She waited until mid-morning before going inside. At her desk, nothing had changed. No boxes. No suspension notice. No formal reprimand. The absence of action was intentional. They wanted her uncertain. Waiting. Wondering which step would be her last safe one. She logged into the system anyway. Her access was thinner now. Certain databases timed out. Others returned error messages masked as technical glitches. Soft walls closing in. Mara spent the next 2 hours reviewing old cases she'd worked years ago. Cases involving financial crimes that had ended quietly, unsatisfyingly. At the time, she'd blamed lack of evidence. Now, patterns emerged that made her stomach tighten. The same holding structures. The same shell layering. The same legal firms acting as intermediaries. Different victims. Different outcomes. Same invisible hand. She wasn't chasing one murderer. She was brushing up against a machine. Her phone vibrated. This time it was a name she hadn't seen in a long while. Judge Eleanor Price. Mara didn't answer immediately. Price wasn't a friend. She was a retired federal judge who had once overseen a corruption trial that collapsed spectacularly when key witnesses recanted and evidence went missing. Officially, it had been a procedural failure. Unofficially, it had been a warning. Mara answered. "You're stirring something you shouldn't," Price said without greeting. "I didn't reach out." Mara replied. "No." Price agreed. "You were noticed." Mara leaned back in her chair, eyes scanning the precinct floor. "What do you know?" Price exhaled slowly. "I know the name you're circling. I know why you won't find it directly attached to anything criminal. And I know that Elena Crowley wasn't the first person to die after getting too close." Mara closed her eyes briefly. "Why call me now? Because you still believe exposure leads to justice?" Price said. "Most people stop believing that after their first warning. And you?" Mara asked. "I stopped believing." Price replied. "That's why I retired." "But belief and truth aren't the same thing." Mara straightened. "Then tell me the truth." There was a pause. A long one. "The man you're after doesn't order murders," Price said carefully. "He creates conditions. Pressure. Dead ends. Fear. The violence happens downstream, carried out by people who will never testify because they don't even know who they're protecting." "That doesn't absolve him," Mara said. Price agreed. "But it makes him nearly untouchable." Mara felt the weight of that word settle. "Nearly," she repeated. Price's voice softened. "If you continue, they will not arrest you. They will not fire you, they will discredit you slowly. Question your judgment. Your stability. Your past cases. They will make the truth sound like obsession." Mara glanced at the framed commendation on her desk. The one she'd earned early in her career. It felt like it belonged to someone else now. "What would you do?" Mara asked. "I would make sure that when you fall," Price said, "you fall forward." The line went dead. Mara sat there long after, letting the words settle. Fall forward. It meant she couldn't win this by playing defense. She couldn't hoard evidence and wait for permission. She needed leverage. Something that didn't rely on warrants or approvals. Something that forced the system to respond rather than smother. That afternoon, Mara took a personal day. Officially. Unofficially. She drove 3 hours north to a town that barely registered on most maps. A place where records were kept on paper longer than they should have been, and where old alliances still mattered. Elena Crowley had interned here during college. The internship had never made it into her professional profile. Mara parked outside a modest accounting office just before sunset. The sign flickered, half lit inside. A man in his 60s looked up as she entered, recognition dawning slowly. "You're Elena's friend," he said quietly. "I'm trying to be," Mara replied. He nodded toward the back office. "She asked me once what happens when numbers stop adding up, but no one wants them balanced." Mara followed him, heart pounding. This wasn't the beginning of the case. It was the beginning of the truth. And for the first time since Elena Crowley's death, Mara felt certain of one thing. Someone had underestimated how far she was willing to go. The accounting office closed behind Mara with a soft click that felt louder than it should have. The man introduced himself as Harold Finch. He had the posture of someone who had spent decades leaning over ledgers, shoulders slightly rounded, movements economical and precise. His office smelled faintly of paper and old coffee, the scent of work done without applause. The walls were lined with filing cabinets that predated most digital systems, each drawer labeled in neat, deliberate handwriting. Elena was bright. Harold said as he poured 2 cups of coffee. Too bright for this place. She asked questions most interns never think to ask. Mara accepted the cup but didn't drink. What kind of questions? The dangerous kind, he replied. Who benefits? Who signs without reading? Who never appears on the documents but always profits? Mara felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Did she find anything specific? Harold opened a cabinet and slid out a thick folder. The paper inside was yellowed, the ink faded but still legible. She noticed patterns. Shell companies that changed names, but not behavior. Funds that moved through charitable fronts before ending up in private holdings. All legal on paper. All wrong in practice. He flipped to a page marked with a red tab. This was her first red flag. A holding company that never appeared twice under the same name, but always used the same accounting structure. Mara leaned closer. The numbers were meticulous. Elegant, even. Whoever designed this system had understood compliance deeply enough to weaponize it. She asked me who owned it. Harold continued. I told her the truth. No one you could touch. Mara looked up. Did she contact anyone after that? Harold hesitated. She asked about protective disclosures. About what happens when you know something you shouldn't. And what did you tell her? Mara asked. That the law protects whistleblowers, he said quietly. And that sometimes the law arrives too late. Silence filled the room. She didn't believe me, he added. She thought if she documented everything carefully enough, someone higher up would step in. Mara thought of the burner call. The 43 seconds. The hope Elena must have felt dialing that number. Did she leave copies? Mara asked. Harold nodded and reached beneath his desk, pulling out a slim flash drive. She gave this to me 2 months ago. Told me to hold it and forget about it unless something happened to her. Mara took it carefully, as if it might shatter. Why didn't you come forward? Harold met her gaze. Because the last person who did ended up bankrupt and drunk within a year. Reputation destroyed. Family gone. And the people responsible were never even named. Mara stood slowly. You did the right thing holding on to this. I hope so, he said. Night had fallen by the time Mara returned to her car. The town was quiet. The kind of quiet that came from people knowing when not to ask questions. She didn't plug the flash drive in immediately. She drove first, putting distance between herself and the office, between herself and the past Elena had tried to preserve. She stopped at a roadside diner an hour later, the kind that never truly closed. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she slid into a booth and ordered coffee she didn't need. Only then did she take out her laptop. The files loaded slowly. Spreadsheets, memos, internal notes written in Elena's careful, methodical style. She'd mapped relationships across years, connecting entities that officially had nothing to do with one another. At the center of it all was a familiar architecture. The same holding company structure Mara had already encountered. But this time, there was more. Emails. Not from the man at the top, but from intermediaries. Advisors. Consultants. People who spoke in careful language and never committed to anything explicitly criminal. Yet the intent was there, threaded between the lines. One message froze Mara's breath. Elena, This is your last opportunity to step back. Compliance is about knowing when not to pursue perfection. The timestamp was 2 days before Elena's death. Mara closed the laptop slowly. This wasn't a threat made in anger. It was a warning issued as policy. Her phone buzzed. Evan again, you need to know something, he said, voice low. Someone accessed your personnel psych evaluation from years ago. The one after the Mason case. Mara's jaw tightened. That file's sealed. Not to them. Evan replied. They're building a narrative. Mara looked out the diner window at the dark highway beyond. How much time do I have? Before it turns official. Evan paused. A week. Maybe less. That's enough, Mara said, and ended the call. She drove the rest of the way back in silence, mind racing. They weren't trying to arrest her. They were preparing to discredit her. To make any evidence she presented look like obsession. Retaliation. Instability. When Mara reached her apartment, she didn't go inside right away. She sat in her car and watched the building. Lights flickered on and off. A neighbor passed by with a dog. Nothing unusual. Still, she waited. Only when she was satisfied no one was watching did she enter. Inside, everything was as she'd left it. Too neat. Mara set her laptop on the table and opened a new document. Not an official report, not notes for the department. A timeline, names, relationships, motives. A story. Because that was how this would end. Not with a warrant, not yet. But with a narrative so complete it couldn't be dismissed, without exposing the people trying to bury it. As dawn approached, Mara felt the exhaustion settle deep in her bones. But beneath it was something sharper. Clarity. They had underestimated Elena, and now, they were underestimating her. That mistake would cost them everything. Mara slept for less than 2 hours before her phone pulled her back into the world. The vibration was insistent, impatient, as if whoever was calling had already decided sleep was a luxury she no longer deserved. She silenced it once, rolled onto her side, then stopped when the instinct hit her again. This wasn't routine. This was timing. She answered. You need to check the news, Evan said. He didn't bother with greetings anymore. Right now. Mara sat up, heart steady, mind already moving. What kind of news? The kind that doesn't mention your name. Evan replied, yet. She ended the call and opened her laptop. The headline was already trending. Financialist stage ra aldiacca de intel afta den fida g is. Mara read the article once. Then again, slower. Anonymous sources within law enforcement claimed new evidence supported the original robbery narrative. The piece emphasized Elena Crowley's high-stress workload, hinting at personal instability. It quoted a behavioral expert suggesting that perceived threats were common among professionals handling sensitive data. Mara closed the laptop. This was the narrative Judge Price had warned her about. They weren't denying the crime. They were redefining the victim. She showered quickly and dressed without caring how she looked. This wasn't about optics anymore. It was about momentum. Whoever had pushed this article out had done so deliberately, knowing it would shape public perception before any contradictory information could surface. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her captain. Mara, he said, voice careful. We need to talk. I figured. She replied. Off the record. He added. Come by my office. She arrived 20 minutes later. The blinds were drawn. The door closed behind her with a finality that felt rehearsed. Her captain didn't invite her to sit. There are concerns? He began. About your recent conduct. Concerns raised by whom? Mara asked. He hesitated. That's not something I can disclose. Mara nodded. Then this isn't off the record. He sighed. You've been seen at locations connected to a closed case. You've contacted individuals without authorization. And now there are questions about your objectivity. Amara held his gaze. Because I didn't accept a convenient conclusion. Because you appear emotionally invested. He corrected. And that makes you vulnerable. Mara thought of the psych file Evan had mentioned. The Mason case. The months she'd spent rebuilding her credibility after pushing too hard against the wrong people. This is a warning. Her captain continued. Take leave. Step back. Let this go. And if I don't? Mara asked. He looked away. Then I won't be able to protect you. Amara nodded once. Thank you for your honesty. She left without another word. Outside, the city felt louder than before. Car horns, construction, conversations bleeding into one another. Noises camouflage. She walked without direction for several blocks, letting the energy burn off the anger building in her chest. They were accelerating again, which meant she was closer than ever. Mara drove to a place she hadn't planned to visit yet. The financial firm's primary data center sat on the outskirts of the city, disguised as a logistics hub. No signage. No windows. Just concrete, fencing, and guards who looked more military than corporate. She didn't try to get inside. She parked across the road and watched. Shift changes. Badge scans. Delivery schedules. Patterns emerged quickly. Security wasn't tight because they expected break-ins. It was tight because they expected scrutiny. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. You're making this difficult, the voice said. The same one from before. Calm, controlled, annoyed now. You're making it obvious. Mara replied. A pause. You don't understand the scope of what you're interfering with. I understand exactly enough. Mara said. Someone identified Elena Crowley as a liability and eliminated her. Another pause. Longer this time. People die every day, the voice said. Attribution is a luxury. Mara smiled faintly. Then why call me again? Silence. Because you're not supposed to be this persistent, he finally said. And because persistence creates instability. Good. Mara replied. The line went dead. Mara sat back and let the pieces align. They weren't trying to stop her anymore. They were trying to assess damage. That meant the information Elena left behind mattered. It wasn't just embarrassing. It wasn't just ethically questionable. It threatened something structural. She drove to a secure storage facility she'd rented under a false name years ago. Inside, she transferred Elena's files onto multiple encrypted drives, each prepared with instructions and contingencies. If anything happened to her, the data would not disappear quietly. By nightfall, Mara had drafted a full outline. Not evidence for a court. Not yet, a map. Names. Money flows. Deaths that had never been connected because no one had wanted to connect them. Elena Crowley wasn't the anomaly. She was the variable that broke the pattern. Mara leaned back in her chair, eyes burning from exhaustion, mind sharper than it had been in days. They were preparing to destroy her credibility. So she would move faster than their narrative. She opened a new secure channel and began drafting a message to a single recipient. Not law enforcement. Not media. Someone who dealt in controlled detonations of truth. Someone who knew how to publish without asking permission. Mara paused before sending it. Once this crossed the line, there would be no stepping back. No quiet resolution. No career to salvage. She thought of Elena. Alone in her apartment. Trusting the wrong system to protect her. Mara hit send. The message left her screen and entered a world where silence could no longer contain it. Outside, the city carried on, unaware that something had just shifted, but somewhere high above, behind glass and money and power, someone felt it. The pressure. And for the first time since Elena Crowley died, the machine hesitated. The response didn't come immediately. Mara had expected that. People who dealt in controlled detonations never rushed. They verified. They insulated themselves. They tested the blast radius before lighting the fuse. Still, the waiting gnawed at her in a way the threats hadn't. Silence from enemies was predictable. Silence from allies was not. She spent the next day moving through the city like a ghost. She didn't return to the precinct. There was no point. Her presence there would only accelerate the narrative being built around her. Instead, she worked from borrowed spaces. A public library in the morning, where the quiet felt earned. A crowded cafe in the afternoon, where anonymity came from noise and motion. She kept her back to walls, her exits clear, her phone face down unless she needed it. By early evening, the first consequence arrived. Her badge access was officially suspended. The email was clinical, stripped of emotion. Temporary administrative leave pending evaluation. Mandatory counseling review. A polite suggestion that she disconnect from ongoing investigations for her own well-being. They had crossed the line from implication to action. Mara deleted the email without responding. That night, she drove past the home of Judge Eleanor Price without stopping. The lights were on. Curtains drawn. Mara didn't approach. She didn't need to. The judge had already done what she could. The rest of this wouldn't be handled through courtrooms or chambers. Her phone vibrated just after midnight. A secure message, routed through 3 relays. I've reviewed the material. It's solid. And it's dangerous. Mara exhaled slowly. When do you publish? She typed back. Not yet, came the reply. First, I need confirmation. Not of the data. Of intent. Mara stared at the screen. Once this is public. The message continued. There will be retaliation. Not just against you. Against anyone connected to you. I need to know you're prepared for that. Mara didn't hesitate. I already crossed that line. She typed. Alana didn't get the chance. The reply came almost immediately. Then we move. An hour later. Mara noticed the first sign of counterpressure. Her bank app wouldn't load. She tried again. Error message. She called the number on the back of her card from a payphone. The representative was polite, apologetic, and useless. Her account had been flagged for review due to usual activity. Mara thanked her and hung up. They weren't improvising anymore. They were applying pressure everywhere at once. By morning, it escalated. Her landlord left a voicemail citing a complaint. Noise. Unauthorized guests. Possible lease violations. Nothing actionable yet. Just documentation. Just groundwork. Mara listened, then deleted the message. She drove to the secure storage unit and checked the drives. All intact. All duplicated. She left one copy behind, hidden deeper than before, and took another with her. Redundancy wasn't paranoia. It was survival. That afternoon, she noticed the car again. Black. Nondescript. Different model than before, but the same behavior. Never tailing directly. Always appearing in reflections. In windows. In the periphery. She led it through traffic deliberately, making sudden turns, doubling back. Blending into congestion. Eventually, it vanished. That was worse than if it had stayed. Mara parked near the river and sat with the engine off, watching the water move steadily beneath the bridge. She forced herself to breathe slowly. Fear clouded judgment, anger narrowed it. She needed clarity now more than ever. Elena had trusted a system. Mara trusted leverage. Her phone buzzed again. Another secure message. We've identified the center of gravity. The sender wrote. Not the man himself, the board. Mara's pulse quickened. They don't pull triggers. The message continued. They don't issue orders. They authorize environments, and they meet in 48 hours. Mara typed carefully. Where? A pause. Privately. Invitation only. Disguised as a philanthropic summit. Mara smiled grimly. Of course it was. That night she didn't sleep. She built timelines, crossed, referenced names. Trace donations, speaking engagements, shell foundations. Patterns tightened, converging toward a small group of men who never appeared together in public, but shared the same accountants, the same legal buffers, the same silence. And one name kept appearing just off the page. Never on the signature line. Never on the paperwork, but always implied. The businessman. The one everyone deferred to without saying why. By dawn, Mara had what she needed. Not proof that would satisfy a court, but a narrative strong enough to survive attack. Her phone vibrated one last time as the sun rose. They know something is coming. The message read. They're trying to contain it. Mara stood, slinging her bag over her shoulder. Then let's make sure it doesn't stay contained. She typed back. She stepped out into the morning light, fully aware that by the end of the next 48 hours one of two things would happen. Either the truth would surface, or she would disappear with it. And Mara had already decided which outcome she was willing to risk. The philanthropic summit took place behind glass and guarded smiles. From the outside, it looked harmless. A lakeside conference center wrapped in banners about sustainability and innovation. Valets in pressed uniforms. Security dressed as hospitality. Inside, power moved quietly, unannounced, carried in posture rather than volume. Mara arrived an hour early. Not as a guest. As a shadow. She parked along a service road that curved behind the property, far enough away to avoid cameras but close enough to watch patterns. Deliveries came in first. Catering trucks. Audio equipment. Floral arrangements. Each one cleared with minimal inspection. The real scrutiny was reserved for people, not objects. That was always the mistake. Mara waited until a catering truck rolled in late. Driver irritated. Paperwork rushed. She slipped in behind it, timing her steps with practiced precision, blending into motion rather than hiding from it. No one challenged her. No one looked twice. Inside, the air was cool and carefully controlled. The kind of environment designed to make difficult conversations feel reasonable. Men in tailored suits gathered in small clusters, their lauder low, their body language relaxed. They spoke of markets and donations and regulatory optimism. None of them spoke of Elena Crowley. Mara moved through the space like a guest with nowhere urgent to be. She listened. She observed. She let the architecture of power reveal itself the way it always did, through hierarchy rather than statements. Who waited before speaking? Who was interrupted? Who never had to raise their voice to command attention? And then she saw him. He wasn't the loudest. He wasn't the center of the room. He stood near a window, hands folded behind his back, listening while others spoke around him. When he nodded, conversations shifted. When he turned slightly, people followed without realizing why. The businessman. Mara didn't know his name yet. She didn't need it. She felt the pressure in the room change when he arrived fully, when his presence settled like gravity. This was the man Elena Crowley had threatened by accident. The man whose system had decided she was a variable to be removed. Mara slipped into a side corridor and connected her burner to a secure uplink. The journalist responded immediately. "We're live in 30 minutes. The message read. Once it drops, there's no pulling it back. Mara typed quickly. I'm inside. They're all here. A pause. Then make sure they hear it. Came the reply. The presentation began on schedule. Panels. Applause. Carefully curated optimism. Mara stood at the back, near a technical console, eyes on the room, waiting for the moment when complacency peaked. Her phone vibrated. Publishing now. The article went live at exactly 10:17 a.m. At first, nothing happened. Then phones began to light up, one by one. Then in clusters. Conversations faltered. Faces tightened. A man near the front read something on his screen and sat down abruptly. Another stepped away, voice low, urgent. The businessman didn't move. Not at first. He continued listening to the panel, head slightly tilted, as if the world hadn't just shifted beneath his feet. That alone confirmed everything Mara needed to know. Then he glanced at his phone. Just once. His expression didn't change, but the room did. Security stiffened. A subtle signal passed between two men near the exits. The atmosphere cooled, sharpened. Mara felt it. Exposure. The article didn't accuse him directly. It didn't have to. It laid out the structure. The shell entities. The pattern of deaths. The silenced audits. Elena's work contextualized and undeniable. And it named the holding companies. The ones tied to him. Mara stepped away as security began moving, her heart steady, her mind clear. This was no longer about escape. It was about timing. She exited through the same service corridor she'd entered, slipping back into daylight as sirens began to sound in the distance. Not police. Media, the faster responders. By the time she reached her car, the summit was already unraveling. She drove. Not fast, not slow, just enough to stay invisible. Her phone buzzed again. "They're scrambling," the journalist wrote. "He's denying everything. Calling it speculative. But it's sticking." Mara exhaled slowly. "Good," she typed. Because denial buys time. And time creates mistakes. She merged onto the highway, the city stretching ahead of her, uncertain and awake. This wasn't the end. But it was the first moment the machine had been forced to acknowledge resistance. And somewhere behind her, a very rich man was realizing that for the first time in decades, silence was no longer protecting him. It was isolating him. The fallout was immediate, but not chaotic. That was the first thing Mara noticed as the story spread. There were no dramatic arrests, no urgent press conferences with flashing lights and shouted questions. Instead, there was something far more telling: containment. By the time Mara reached the edge of the city, every major outlet was running a version of the same headline. Investigative expose, anonymous sources, complex financial networks, no definitive conclusions, no named culprit at the center. Carefully worded, carefully restrained. Her phone buzzed constantly, but she ignored most of it. Messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Missed calls routed through unfamiliar exchanges. She knew better than to engage now. This was the phase where mistakes were baited, not forced. She pulled into a rest stop just outside city limits and parked beneath a row of dim lights. Trucks idled nearby, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. She stayed in the car, watching reflections in her side mirrors, counting exits. Her burner vibrated. "They're pushing back hard," the journalist wrote. "Legal threats. Emergency injunction attempts. Claims of defamation." Mara typed back calmly. "Expected. They're also leaking," came the reply. "Not intentionally. People panic when systems crack." That mattered. Leaks meant fractures. Mara closed her eyes briefly and let the exhaustion wash over her without claiming control. She'd been running on tension for days now, and her body was beginning to collect the debt. Still, her mind remained sharp, alert to the smallest shift. She checked the secure drives again. Everything was still there. And more importantly, everything was now duplicated beyond her control. If she disappeared, the story would not. That was the leverage Elena never got to see. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Judge Price. Mara answered. "You did what I warned you not to," Price said. There was no anger in her voice, only gravity. "I did what Elena couldn't," Mara replied. A pause. "You've destabilized a network that's existed for decades." "Good," Mara said. "They'll survive," Price continued. "But not unchanged. And not quietly." Mara stared through the windshield at the dark highway ahead. "What happens next?" Price exhaled slowly. "Now they try to reframe you. Reckless. Obsessive. A rogue investigator who went outside the system and caused unnecessary harm. Mara smiled faintly. They've been building that story for weeks. Yes. Price agreed. Which means the next move is theirs. As if on cue, Mara's phone chimed with a new notification. A press release draft, already circulating privately. It questioned her mental fitness. Cited past evaluations. Referred to her actions as unsanctioned and emotionally driven. It didn't accuse her of falsifying evidence. It didn't have to. Doubt was enough. They're going to sacrifice you. Price said quietly. Publicly. Mara didn't respond immediately. She thought of Alina Crowley sitting alone at her desk, believing that if she documented carefully enough, someone would protect her. She thought of the quiet men who had decided her life was an acceptable cost of doing business. If they burn me, Mara said finally. They admit the fire exists. Price was silent for a long moment. Be careful, she said. This is the most dangerous point. The call ended. Mara stepped out of the car and stretched, the cool night air biting at her skin. She walked to the edge of the rest stop and looked out at the darkened trees beyond the lights. Somewhere out there, decisions were being made about her future by people who had never met her. That didn't scare her. What scared them was that she no longer needed permission. Her burner buzzed again. New message. Emergency session called. The journalist wrote, board members. Closed doors. One of them is talking. Mara's pulse quickened. Ooh. Not the man at the center. Came the reply. Someone below him. Someone who thinks survival means distance. Mara nodded to herself. That was how machines failed. Not from the top, but from the pressure below. She returned to her car and started the engine. This wasn't over yet. But the direction had changed. And for the first time since Alina Crowley's name appeared on a death certificate, Mara felt something dangerously close to hope. The kind that didn't promise safety. Only truth. The call came just before sunrise. Mara was parked on a bluff overlooking the river, the city spread out beneath her like a map of consequences. She hadn't slept, she hadn't tried. This was the hour when people broke. Not from fear, but from exhaustion. When the truth slipped out because holding it in required more energy than they had left. Her burner vibrated. This is it. The journalist said, his agreed to talk. On record. Limited scope but enough. Mara closed her eyes briefly. Why now? Because the board turned on him, came the reply. Not publicly. Quietly. They're positioning him as a liability, a bad actor who exceeded his mandate. Mara let out a slow breath. The businessman had finally become expendable. Where? She asked. Secure location. Federal presence. He wants assurances. Assurances of what? Mara asked. That he won't be the only one to fall. Mara ended the call and sat still as the first light of day crept across the skyline. This was always how it ended. Not with justice. With negotiation. By mid-morning, the story broke again. This time, it had a name. A senior executive from one of the holding companies. Someone close enough to the center to know how the machine worked, but far enough to survive its collapse. Had come forward. He described the system without dramatics. The compliance structures, the pressure channels, the quiet removal of risks. And then, he described Alina Crowley. Not as a victim. As a problem that had been escalated. He didn't say the businessman ordered her death. He didn't have to. He described the meeting where Alina's audit was discussed to resolve exposure. The understanding that intermediaries would whittle the outcome. Everyone present had known what that meant, including the man who never spoke during those meetings. The man who always listened. By noon, the businessman's name was everywhere. Not accused, associated, linked, questioned. That was enough. Mara watched the coverage from her car. The radio low, the commentators cautious. Stocks dipped. Partnerships paused. Donations were quietly redirected. No handcuffs yet. No indictments. But the silence around him was gone. And without silence, he was just another man with too much to explain. Her phone rang. This time, it was her captain. Mara, he said, voice strained. You need to come in. She considered it. Am I under arrest? No, he said quickly. Not even close. But, things are changing. I imagine they are. Mara replied. When she walked into the precinct, the atmosphere had shifted. People looked at her differently now. Not with suspicion. Not with concern. With distance. She was no longer useful. She was radioactive. The captain met her in his office and closed the door. There will be an internal review, he said. Publicly, the department will distance itself from your actions. Privately. He trailed off. Privately? Mara asked. He sighed. Privately, some people are relieved you did what you did. Mara nodded. And my badge? He slid it across the desk. Suspended. Indefinitely. Not revoked. Not returned. A compromise. Mara picked it up and turned it over in her hand. What about Elena Crowley? She asked. The captain's expression hardened. Her death is being reclassified. No robbery. No accident. Murder. Mara said. Yes, he replied. And it will never officially name the man at the top. Mara expected that. But, he continued, every investigation tied to that network is being reopened. Quietly. Thoroughly. That was more than Elena had been promised. Mara stood. Outside, reporters waited. Cameras lifted. Questions formed. She walked past them without stopping. She had said everything that needed to be said already. That evening, as the city settled into a different kind of quiet, Mara returned to her apartment. For the first time in days, nothing was waiting for her. No envelope. No warning. No message. She sat at the table where the photograph had once been and opened her laptop. She created a new folder. Elena Crowley. Inside it, she placed everything, not as evidence. As memory. Because systems forgot people. Mara didn't. Her phone buzzed one last time that night. A message from an unknown number. You were effective. Mara stared at it, then typed back. So was she. She turned off the phone and let the silence settle. The businessman was still free, but he was no longer untouchable. And somewhere in the machinery of power, a lesson had been learned at a cost that could never be written off. Some truths, once exposed, never go back to sleep. And Mara was already walking toward the next one. Oh, This case is inspired by the idea that power rarely pulls the trigger, but it often loads the weapon. If this story made you question how justice really works, stay with us. Midnight Case Files will be here, in the shadows, where the truth waits to be found.